These are the rooms that Mozart, I have skipped ahead so fast. Oh, here we go. No, I just wanted to get the date. It's the early 1700s. These are the rooms where Mozart's music was played. Palaces they're not as big as the church that Bach worked in. Certainly not as big as the cathedral. They're actually not that much bigger than this room. Not that much. A little bit more ornate. But they'd also be filled with people, and sometimes, like with that kind of music, they would dance. And sonically, because of that, he could write stuff that was a little more ornate and fancy and intricate, and all that could be heard. This is La Scala, as it is today, the opera house in Milan. The picture is deceiving. It's actually not that big of a place. Well, let's see, for New Yorkers, the floor is probably the size of Irving Plaza or something like that. And the floor didn't used to be, when it was before their renovation, it didn't used to be all rows of seats. It used to be boxes and these little areas. And the audience behavior was very different than it is at opera houses today. Then they used to bring food and drink and yell out. People in the orchestra would yell out to people on the balcony, and it was a social thing. And if somebody on stage did a nice aria that everybody liked, they'd yell out encore, and the encore was expected to happen right then. Not like at the end, but we like that, do it again. So it was a very different vibe than opera houses today. It was a little bit more like a club. I'll get to how that changed. This is, I guess it's pronounced Bayreuth, the opera house that Wagner had built to accommodate his music. So he's kind of the exception that doesn't prove the rule or something, because he had the sufficiently large ego that he didn't write music specifically to accommodate existing halls. He had a hall built just for his own music. Yeah, that takes some nerve, but, well, as you can see, the hall itself is not that big. The number of people at hall, it's very ornate, but the actual audience capacity is not that big. It's not that deep. You can imagine it's probably not that reverbery or echoey sounding. What he did was he enlarged the space for the band. He gave the band a bigger stage because he wanted to have more brass instruments and basses and things like that. He wanted a little bit more bombast, and he got it. And okay, so which is, I mean, hearing a huge orchestra playing this kind of stuff, and right in your face, which doesn't happen today, but it's pretty amazing. If you're like 3 feet away from them all, they're all kind of flailing away at this stuff. Okay, this is, so at some point, symphony halls and opera houses evolved into, it got to be pretty popular, and evolved into larger and larger rooms. This is Carnegie Hall. It's very echoey. It's a very echoey room. I've played there a couple of times, and I wouldn't recommend playing there with a lot of drums and percussion. But certain kinds of music really work in these rooms. So the rooms that were built for audiences, maybe ostensibly to hear Mozart or Wagner or whatever else, they ended up being larger than the rooms that those musicians wrote for. And so the musicians of the later centuries, in the early 20th century, started writing music that was a little more textural. At least that's what I'm saying. It's kind of smeary. It doesn't matter if it's in a super reverby room. We're kind of getting back into the kind of cathedral thing. That was Mahler. There's percussion, but it's all just like cymbal crashes and stuff like that. It's not like there's any kind of groove going that's going to get all washy in that room. So at the same time as Carnegie Hall, kind of turn of the century, not this century, but the one before, popular music, jazz bands are coming out of New Orleans. And a friend told me that this kind of music came about because they were playing in clubs, riverboats, different places like that. And different parts of the song had slightly different grooves, slightly different things going on. And if the dancers really liked one particular part of the song, the dancers in the club would play that part more. And the band would have to inevitably figure out a way, to stretch out that one section of the song, which they couldn't, they could just repeat that part of the tune over and over again like a loop, but they decided that would kind of be cheating or get kind of tedious. So they figured out, we can improvise and play the same changes, same groove, and extend that section of song, because that's what that's the part of the song that dancers are really into. And so a new kind of music was born because they were working for the dancers. Those musicians also started switching. They adopted instruments that worked for the dancers and in the venues. Again, they had to play above the level of the crowd. So they'd switch an acoustic guitar would get switched to a banjo because it was louder. I think in that picture you saw one of the guys playing a violin. That might have been switched to a trumpet so that everything became a little bit louder. So a lot of other, we can take the rest of the 20th century popular music, a lot of it just from that, whether it's rock and roll or Latin music or blues or whatever, they all kind of, structurally at least, the approach of the band and the dancers and all that is all very similar to that early jazz. And then, but something happened, according to Alex Ross, the music writer that writes for the New Yorker, around 1900, it was decided somewhere that in concert halls, you weren't allowed to yell out to your friends anymore or yell out for encores. Opera houses, all that kind of stuff. It was going to be like it's going to be now. Be quiet. You weren't allowed to pull out wrappers and clothes, candies, and all that kind of stuff that is frowned on today. God forbid they had cell phones. But so it was all of a sudden this quiet was enforced in the concert hall. One of the reasons that he gives is that that kept out the hoi polloi. Although I don't understand why they decided that poor people were necessarily noisier than rich people, but somebody decided that. Anyway, so this is the Rose, I think it's called the Rose Theater at Jazz at Lincoln Center. There's lots of places like this around the world where you're expected to listen to what was once dance music, played in bars and fairly loud, but now it's played in a concert hall and you're expected to be incredibly quiet. Well, you might say the upside of this, as he describes it, was that in the 20th century, since that was the new policy, composers could write stuff, whether it was in the kind of quasi-classical jazz idiom or classical music, that had incredible dynamics. You could have music that had really, really quiet passages and then really loud passages, and because the audience was not making a single sound, they could hear it all.